Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Fun one for us. Got a chance to hear from Georgia coach Kirby Smart yesterday, and perhaps some of the rumors we've been hearing about Georgia fall camp, which is sort of weird to call it fall camp when it's 100 degrees, but nonetheless, some of the rumors we've been hearing about Georgia fall camp perhaps have been confirmed based on what Kirby Smart said yesterday. Also, plenty of chatter still out there about Georgia being ranked as the preseason number one team in the Associated Press, top 25. We'll talk about that. Mike Griffith stops by today. A former UGA recruiting target has an interesting new twist in his saga as a prospect. We will cover all of that, but we could not do it if you weren't with us. So truly, sincerely, genuinely, we say thank you for being with us. And with that in mind, we'll go ahead and get it started. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
A lot of the chatter around college football for fans and shows like this that serve fans, we're sort of a voice of the fan for the fans. That's why we say we're the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. A lot of the fan chatter is always going to be related to the rumor mill. What's the stuff that can't necessarily be officially reported because you don't have 17 sources confirming, but is largely believed to be true? You know, when fans congregate, there's just sort of an acceptance of the conventional wisdom of the rumor mill that just sort of is a part of the overall discussion. And everybody kind of understands that we don't know for sure this is true, but we're hearing this so much, it seems like it might be true. And that's just sort of an accepted way in which fans talk with each other, and fans, when they get together, sort of understand all of that. And so on a show like this, obviously, we're going to kind of reference some of that. We've got to be careful about what we give too much credence to because we don't want to, run with anything that's false, of course. But at the same time, if a lot of people are saying the same thing, we want to be paying close attention to the thing that we're repeatedly hearing over and over again. And I would say the number one example of that from this year's fall camp for Georgia, at least for the positive, has been what's going on with the Georgia running back situation, where when you, as I like to say, talk to people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, some of you, well-heeled, very moneyed boosters who show up on your Rolls Royce and you got your monocle on, and you know what that is, the little thing. I don't know why I always go to the monocle, but either way, the more sophisticated of you, the McGill Society members had a chance to be at Georgia's scrimmage on Saturday, and once again, a lot of folks left that talking about these Georgia running backs, talking about Nate Frazier in particular. Oh my gosh, this guy's got a spark. Oh my gosh, this guy brings a level of athleticism to the table. Oh my gosh, this incoming freshman is going to make this Georgia running back situation far more interesting for the upcoming season. And when you're hearing that over and over and over again, once again, you don't see this with your own eyes. You can't know this for sure. Some of this, even from people who say they saw it, the eyewitness accounts, there's still a level of speculation sort of baked into the cake on something like that. But you're hearing it so frequently that you're almost forced to take it seriously. It sounds like the Georgia running backs are having themselves a good fall camp, and it sounds like, in particular right now, the incoming freshman Nate Frazier is really vying for some playing time for the Dogs this fall in his first year on campus. So yesterday, the big rumor of what may be going on with the Georgia running backs and the role that Nate Frazier may be playing and all that, in some form or fashion, we got about as close to a confirmation from Kirby Smart as we're ever going to get. That, yeah, you know what? So far, for a guy that did not have fall camp and is having to learn a lot pretty quickly, so far they're pretty happy with what they've seen from Nate Frazier, echoing what fans and boosters and the like and insiders to the program have been saying now for a couple of weeks. This is Kirby Smart from yesterday.
He's certainly a guy that's trying hard to learn, to understand. I don't think he's ever had the detail of, on this run, this is your key. He gets the ball and runs. And there's a lot to our blocking schemes in terms of who is he reading, who is he looking at, what are his steps, what does he have to do in protection. He's got a lot to learn in terms of things. He didn't go through spring. So his spring is now. His spring was in the summer. So he's got a lot of catching up to do. He is an explosive kid. He's got good track times. He's got good speed. He's got great toughness. He's a little ball of energy. But there's a bunch of guys in that room they're doing a great job. Johnson's doing a great job. The young kids, White's doing a good job. I mean, those guys are all doing a great job, and we need them to help us this year.
So it's the part that Smart mentions about the fact that Frazier does, as Smart has observed, have that level of explosiveness that makes him interesting. I don't dispute, and I don't think any Georgia fan that's following this stuff closely would dispute. Of course, when you show up as a summer arrival, when you don't have spring practice, you do have a lot to learn. Even if we kind of conventionally believe, conventional wisdom would lead you to believe, that the running back position is among the easier positions to play as an incoming true freshman, that doesn't mean there isn't still a pretty steep learning curve in terms of how you pick up blitzes, how you kind of understand the various aspects of the offense and your job on each individual play. I'm sure that still feels like a lot to learn, and I'm sure Frazier probably feels like he's drinking out of a fire hose when it comes to all of that. And yet, for those who were there on Saturday, or for some, I believe, who saw him at the Classic City Collective practice the week prior to that, there is an explosiveness with Frazier that cannot be denied. And it's the kind of thing, we'll get more into this in a moment, but it's the kind of thing that the Georgia running back position could probably use a little more of based on the last couple of years. Not to say that Georgia hasn't had a high standard at the running back position. It obviously has. But is there a different level of athleticism? Is there a different level of explosiveness that could be achieved? I believe there could be, and obviously Frazier would certainly have a way of being a contributor to all of that. But, as Kirby Smart also rightly points out, that while Frazier himself seems to be kind of a nice, pleasant surprise thus far during fall camp, he is far from the only Georgia running back who I think people feel really good about here right now, that this seems like it has been a really good start to the preseason, lead up to the start of the season for the Georgia running backs overall. We've obviously talked a good bit about Georgia running backs on this show in recent days, and I think our reasons for doing so are well-founded because as you get closer to the program, more and more people who have better access than I do, they are also talking about the Georgia running backs right now and what might be going on with this group. And so with that in mind, Kirby Smart also talked more about the fullness of this running back room right now. This is what he said yesterday.
Yeah, that room has been really good in camp. They've worked really hard. Cash is a guy that people just don't give enough credit to. And he's a really good back. He's great picking things up. I feel like Trevor's the leader of the room and understands things and does a really good job of setting the tempo and setting the standard. Branson's been great. Rod's been dealing with a little bit of a toe injury that he's dealing with, and then 3 freshmen. So we're looking forward to getting all those guys ready to go.
So once again, it's not maybe the most earth-shattering statement from Kirby Smart, but it is a confirmation of, you've heard the running backs are doing well, and guess what? I think they are doing really well. And I kind of take something out of the fact that Kirby Smart says that Trevor Etienne, who is new to the program, is the leader in that room right now. I mean, that means something to me. I mean, obviously Etienne's got the SEC experience, but listen, the standard at Florida right now is very different than the standard at UGA, as you well know. So the fact that Etienne, kind of a short-term member of this team, hasn't been here very long, the fact that he's already having the look of being a leader and capable of leading that room, I sort of take that as a pretty good thing for Georgia, especially when you kind of pair that with what we think Roderick Robinson could be. The fact that we continue to hear, and Kirby Smart alludes to this, the return of Branson Robinson from injury, the fact that seems to be going very well right now. And when it's all said and done, I probably am going to maybe owe Branson a pretty big apology for shortchanging just how quickly he was capable of returning from his injury, because it seems like he's going to set a new standard in terms of a healthy return here, at least based on what we're hearing right now. A lot of that very, very good about the Georgia running back position. So Kirby Smart kind of confirms what many of us would say that we've been hearing about that as of late. So with that now well established, let's talk about what maybe that means here for a moment. Because all of this takes place at a time in which Georgia has gone through a little bit of an offensive transformation. Now, this has been under a couple of different offensive coordinators. Todd Monken arrived here in 2020. We saw some of this from him in year one We saw more of this from him in obviously year 2 when Georgia won its first national championship, the Kirby Smart era, and then it continued in 2022 and then the transition of Mike Bobo in 2023, where Georgia has just become a more effective passing team. They pass it more frequently and they pass it more successfully than they ever did in the early days of Kirby Smart. And so because there's no free lunch in life and, success somewhere is going to cost you probably somewhere else, as we've seen Georgia kind of rise up the ranks of throwing it more frequently and throwing it more successfully when it does throw it, I do think that that there's been a little bit of a trade-off when it comes to the Georgia running back position overall, the Georgia rushing offense overall. I think there's been a little bit of a trade-off for that. 2017, 2018, when Georgia wasn't probably throwing it as much as it does now, this was, among the Power 5 teams anyway, the best rushing offense in America, at least for all intents and purposes. You had a pair of teammates in Nick Chubb and Sony Michel in 2017 that got like 2,500 yards. Elijah Holyfield and DeAndre Swift did about that same, amount in 2018 too. This was a very successful rushing offense back then, but they weren't throwing it nearly as much. Now the storyline has somewhat reversed itself here a little bit. So let's talk for a moment about, with a Georgia passing offense, because of Carson Beck and because of the weapons that Beck might have at his disposal, we still expect this to be a very potent passing attack, a team that passes somewhat frequently and passes successfully when it does. What does it mean to upgrade the rushing attack with this passing offense being where we think that it could be? And this is where I think things get pretty interesting for Georgia, that if you look at the overall stats in college football, there is a way to upgrade your rushing offense, perhaps slightly, without necessarily costing you anything in the passing attack. In fact, I want to read here for a moment. This is from the transcript from Kirby Smart yesterday. I'm not going to play this as a clip just because we don't have time, but Kirby Smart was asked about explosive runs, and he was talking about the fact that he thought they maybe would have had fewer explosive runs. He says, we have a lot of 10 to 12-yard runs, but we haven't had the home runs, the long runs we've historically had, which is like another category of explosive. He says it's something that we pride ourselves on. This is Kirby Smart from yesterday. And to be honest with you, explosive passes happen off play action. So you're not going to be explosive passing team off play action if you can't run the ball. The balance of those is really critical. So how could you measure this? One of the things you hear me talk about a lot are the number of like 10-plus yard rushing plays, or in some cases 20-plus yard rushing plays. But the kind of overall collection of your explosive runs combined with just your overall regular runs, I think another thing that can be somewhat simple and pretty interesting to look at is your overall yards per carry average. Now, in college football, you're also kind of mixing some of the sack yards and things like that into that. So you got a little bit of a skew there, but Georgia doesn't give up very many sacks, so perhaps Georgia's less skewed than others. Here's what you see from a year ago, though. Georgia was 11th in the country. That's not obviously bad at all. 11th in the country in yards per carry at 5.34 for the season. But when you look at the teams that were above Georgia, I think you see a couple of interesting things. If you look at the team that was 7th best in America in yards per carry a year ago, that's better than Georgia. That was Tennessee. What's Tennessee known for? It's known for the Josh Heupel passing offense, spreading guys out wide, throwing the ball a million times. And yet with that very pass-friendly offense, Tennessee found the opportunity last year to be successful on a per-carry basis when it chose to run the ball. Oregon's the same way. Oregon was 3rd nationally last year in yards per carry. This is a team that had Bo Nix, that was throwing the ball a lot of short throws, dump-offs, but nonetheless throwing the ball a ton, and yet they still were successful on a per-carry basis when they chose to run it, despite the fact, or maybe in addition to the fact, they were also very successful as a passing team. The best team in America yet last year on a per-carry basis when it came to running the football was LSU. Some of that skewed because Jaden Daniels is also a running quarterback, but if you look at his overall passing numbers, they were amazing last year, and yet LSU still led the country in yards per carry last season. So the point here is that there is an opportunity for Georgia to upgrade its rushing offense perhaps without giving back anything on the passing attack, because teams that by reputation are very good at throwing the ball, like Tennessee and Oregon and LSU, were also pretty good last year on a per-carry basis there as well. Now, let me give you one more thing on this, and then we'll shift gears and talk about something else. I couldn't help but notice as I was looking at these national rushing stats from a year ago, that the team that was way down at 79th place last season in terms of rushing yards per carry was Ohio State, far worse than Georgia at 4.19 yards per carry. This is the team most frequently compared to Georgia here this year. We'll do some more of this in a moment. The team most frequently compared to Georgia is Ohio State. Georgia's number 1, Ohio State's number 2. In all the preseason polls, Georgia got the most number 1 votes. Ohio State got the second most votes. Georgia and Ohio State are just very frequently mentioned in the same sentence with each other as we get ready to begin this 2024 season. So I think this could be an interesting thing to watch. Obviously, Ohio State wants to upgrade this number this year, especially with what we think might be some struggles at the quarterback position, or at least less than stellar play at the quarterback position. Chip Kelly has been brought in as offensive coordinator. He's a guy that has a history of very successful rushing offenses at both the college and the NFL level. Quinshon Judkins comes over from Ole Miss. I think that acquisition's probably been overrated at least a little bit, but obviously it's a better player than Ohio State had before, at least another very high-level player to go along with the Henderson, who's still there. So clearly that's more power for the rushing offense overall. Let me give you a little bit of a hypothesis just to kind of think about. What if we said the degree to which both these teams improve? How much can Georgia improve on its 5.34 yards per carry number from a year ago? How much can Ohio State improve on its 4.19 yards per carry mark from a year ago? What if we said the degree of improvement that both these teams show might go a long way towards determining who wins the national championship? A little bit of a hypothesis and kind of maybe semi-complicated, but I think there could be something there. That Georgia was better on the ground than Ohio State wants to be even better this year and feels like it's got the running back talent to do that. Ohio State, because of the fact that they're going to need all the help offensively they can get, desperate to see that number improve. So the rate by which both those numbers go up may go a long way towards determining who is better between Ohio State and Georgia here this year. At least that's something to think about. But either way, the overall bottom line is this. We have been hearing a lot of positive buzz about the Georgia running backs as of late. Guys we've seen before like Branson and Roderick Robinson, guys we've seen on other teams like Trevor Etienne, and a newcomer that on the field, at least officially, we haven't seen at all, and that's Nate Frazier. But all these guys in their own way are generating some positive chatter. And for Georgia fans who kind of pride themselves on being RBU, I'd say for right now, that's very good news. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Happy to have you with us. Whatever platform you choose to be here, video, podcast, radio, we're just glad you're here. And we're thankful to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make it all possible. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That is who you get a chance to work with when you work with Breda Pest Management. They're the same company taking care of Sanford Stadium and all those athletic venues around the University of Georgia campus. But when you work with Breda Pest Management, you get more than the prestige of knowing that you're working with the same company that UGA chooses to work with. You're also going to work with a company because of their track record for success, a company that's been in business since 1975, a company that's got like 125, whatever it is, employees stretched all across our market center, taking care of folks day after day after day. That history, that lineage of success, multiple generations of the Breda family working and doing on all that. That history they have can be put to work for you to put more money back in your pocket just for making the switch. I don't have to tell you this. We're going through this with my family all the time. There is just such a strain on the budget in every direction you turn lately. We all understand that. It's seemingly never ending. So where you can save money, where you can put more money back in your pocket, obviously you need to do that. That is what Breda Pest Management gives you a chance to do. So I want you to make the switch today. For your termite protection, for bugs, for critters, all that kind of stuff, I want you to make that switch. Go online, BredaPest.com. That's BREDA, BredaPest.com. Obviously, Matt Brady's a big dog fan. You see him in our YouTube comment section all the time, stirring it up with other Georgia fans. We love that, and we love Breda Pest Management. I am so proud to have them as a part of DawgNation Daily here today. Now, we are going to get Mike Griffith coming up in just a moment. That is going to be a lot of fun. Also, we're going to look here at the continued aftermath of Georgia being ranked as the preseason number 1 team in the country. We'll get to that here coming up, too. Let me just do this very quickly, though. Let me remind you about a couple of ongoing things we have for DawgNation. Getting ready for the start of the 2024 season, our DawgNation invasion to kick things off. that tailgate against Clemson to begin it all. If you'll go to DawgNation.com/tailgate, you still have an opportunity to secure your tickets for that big tailgate event. And if you're one of the first 250 to sign up, you also get the DawgNation Invasion t-shirt, which is so much fun and such a cool thing. We're breakfast themed. The t-shirt's even breakfast themed. You see this? I think that's a great look. What a cool looking t-shirt. The mimosa, the Bloody Mary, the championship trophy. I love that, and we would love for you to be a part of it. The fun breakfast-themed foods, the mimosas, the Bloody Marys, the traditional beer, wine, stuff like that, if that's what you want there as well. All of that going down on Saturday, August 31st. So please go to DawgNation.com/tailgate. Secure your tickets for this great all-inclusive tailgate today. Make sure you do that. And if you want to plus this experience, how about the VIP getaway the night before the game with our friends at Discover Dunwoody? You can stay here where we are in the Dunwoody area, in one of the lovely hotels in this community. And then on Saturday morning, you'll kind of take luxury motor coach over to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, right to the tailgate, get a chance to enjoy all of that, go to the game, and then you'll take the bus back to Dunwoody after the game is over with. It means you don't have to worry about parking, you don't have to worry about driving, things like that. Stay on the Friday night before the game at the Hyatt Place Perimeter Center. Get the round-trip transportation to and from in that luxury motor coach. You get the DawgNation Invasion tailgate tickets, and you get the swag bag courtesy of our friends at Atlanta Sports Strip, which also includes that DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. So all of that going down right now there as well. Go to atlsportstrips.com to find out more about that. That's atlsportstrips.com to find out more about that. All right, before we get Mike Griffith, let's also go around the doghouse here today, which is brought to you by our friends at Zagoria Law. And there is continued aftermath of Georgia being ranked as the preseason number 1 in the AP Top 25. Some of this kind of coming from very prominent voices, some of this coming from Georgia fans. But I want to kind of rattle through some of this here just for a moment, starting with something that yesterday I had not seen, but got a pretty strong reaction from some Georgia fans, that being David Pollack, who obviously, upon Georgia being ranked number 1, took some time to also talk about how that preseason number 1 status could be threatened by the schedule that Georgia's going to play. Let me read this from Pollack. And when I had a chance to read this, I was a little bit, I guess my overall reaction was maybe a little bit different than what I kind of heard secondhand about this. So what Pollack says on X is that I get why Georgia's number 1 to start the season, but I'll be totally stunned if the Dogs end the regular season with that ranking. It's a brutal schedule, man. Good luck to Coach Kirby Smart. So I think words matter. And in this particular case, we need to make sure we get the full context of what Pollack is saying. He says, I'd be totally stunned if the Dogs end the regular season with that ranking. That does not mean he's not predicting Georgia to not win the national championship. In fact, I don't know what Pollack's overall pick about that is. But he's just simply saying that because of the schedule that Georgia's playing, it might not be able to survive as a number 1 through the 12-team regular season. Now, maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but that's not a prediction against Georgia winning the national championship. I think it's also fair to point out, once again, to go back to what boosters told me from Saturday, one of the things that I heard that Kirby Smart relayed to them was, if Georgia is obviously lucky enough to be in the playoff chase, and if you're the coach, you have to sort of acknowledge that's not a given, even though most of us would probably treat it that way. Obviously, Coach Kirby Smart can't necessarily do that. But if Georgia is lucky enough to be in that playoff chase, what Kirby Smart, I was told boosters on Saturday is that it's going to be really important to be kind of the, quote, the hot team going into the playoffs. That I believe the message from Kirby was there is no prize for winning the regular season, being the best team in the regular season. There is no prize for that it's all about getting hot in time for the tournament. We see that in the NFL with the Kansas City Chiefs. That's been something they've done to win Super Bowls. For those of us who are big-time Braves fans, we've sort of seen that from the Braves, the good and the bad. Last year's Braves team sets records all throughout the regular season, gets kicked out of the playoffs almost as quickly as they went in. 2021, a team that on paper was not the best team, but seemingly got hot at the right time. Kirby Smart seemed to kind of deliver the message to some of his fans and boosters there on Saturday that college football is going to now become a little bit more of a sport about, are you playing well when it matters, and not are you kind of running the table wire to wire. That's something kind of important to keep in mind, but interesting words from David Pollack. I wanted to squeeze this into this, got a couple of interesting reactions from a couple of Georgia fans to the overall chatter about Georgia being number one, what they thought about that. Let me show you the first one on the screen here just for a moment. John Boy sent this to me. He said, I need you to do a segment about ESPN College Football Live, doing an entire segment about the AP preseason top 5 teams, and didn't mention Georgia one time. I didn't see the show, but this is what John Boy said occurred there on that. And I would say that it does seem like it's true, right? That to a certain extent, the media seems to have a hard time understanding how to formulate a topic around Georgia. You know, what does it mean for Georgia to be number one again? And it's almost as if the only thing interesting about Georgia is the thought that they might lose or might, succumb to a too tough of a schedule. It does sort of feel like, in contrast to a new coach at Alabama or the potential emergence of Texas or, Ohio State in kind of win now mode, that the storylines around other top teams a little more ready-made than having to try to conjure up something new and different to say about Georgia. And as I've said before, if you're a Georgia fan like John Boy is, I think you're well within your rights to be a little aggravated by that. If you're ESPN, you're doing a college football show, you ought to be talking about Georgia frequently. And if you're not, you're probably not doing it correctly. And I don't think that John Boy is unfair for bringing that up. I'll also show you this one. I thought that was kind of an interesting point. Dylan Hand reached out on the subject of the Georgia schedule saying, I really think that Georgia can run the table this year. But I have an off-the-wall question. If Ohio State played Georgia's schedule, what do you think their record would be? Now, let me tell you why I think this is interesting, because this goes back to something that Joel Klatt talked about the other day, the Fox analyst. He ranked Ohio State over Georgia in his own kind of unofficial preseason ranking, and he referenced the schedule that Ohio State played, objectively easier, at least on paper, than the one that Georgia was playing as his reason for putting Ohio State ahead of Georgia. And I do think that's got to be a fair part of this, which is that if Georgia was playing Ohio State's schedule where, like, there's one really tough road game at Oregon, then obviously Georgia's chances of going undefeated would go way up. If Ohio State was playing Georgia's schedule, then this sort of, if not now, win chat around Ohio State, the pressure on that would be ratcheted up much more because Ohio State, I believe, would just have a much more difficult time of going undefeated or coming out, 11-1, whatever you kind of expect the Buckeyes could be. So I do think this is a fair thing to point out, that some of the perception of Ohio State in comparison to Georgia is obviously shaped by the fact that Ohio State seems to be playing an easier schedule. And if you took the schedules out and you just put the two teams on the field, we think there's a lot to like about Georgia in that comparison. And that's Around the Doghouse here today, brought to you by our friends at Zagoria Law Firm. Now, listen, we've told you this before, that one of the things we love around here when people find their niche and they just really identify that and they zero in on that. And that's what our friends at Zagoria Law Firm are all about. They are really about the only law firm you're ever going to find anywhere that's absolutely dedicated to helping you and coming to your need if you've been bitten by a dog that doesn't belong to you. They specialize in that, and they want to make sure that people get the retribution and are made whole when they get bitten by a dog. They're the only official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. We love that. They literally wrote the book on how to win these types of cases. So if you or someone you love has been bitten by somebody else's dog, I want you to reach out to Zagoria Law Firm to find out more about this. You can give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. Now, in this particular case, dog is spelled the conventional way, D-O-G. 833-GA-DOG-BITE. And you can check out their website at ZagoriaLaw.com. That's ZagoriaLaw.com to find out more about that. Great to have our friends at Zagoria Law Firm as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. All right, for the second consecutive day, I am running pretty late. I apologize for that. I know you're eager to hear what Mike Griffith has to say today. So with that in mind, let's get ready to bring him on. Reaction to what Kirby Smart said yesterday, the ongoing proceedings of Georgia Fall Camp, and the continued aftermath of Georgia being the preseason number one in both the AP and the coaches poll. Let's touch on all of that with Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Mike Griffith here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Mike, my apologies for getting to you late here. I'm thankful for your time, though. And we were just talking a moment ago, Georgia, not unexpectedly, preseason number one in both the AP and the coaches poll, brings out some takes. Some Georgia fans think the Dog's not getting enough credit. Some national folks thinking Georgia, may not live up to that number one ranking. And I think all of this is really fun. I've always loved the preseason rankings, especially the AP preseason poll. What was your reaction to Georgia being number one and the other teams around Georgia in those rankings?
Really the rankings pretty much reflective of what we expected in the offseason. We've obviously done a lot of advanced work and seen a lot of those way too early polls, kind of the usual suspects. It certainly, underlines Georgia's schedule. I think they play 5 teams that are ranked in the top 15 in the nation, and 3 in the top 6. I mean, it's there's not another schedule like that. It's an incredible schedule, and it says a lot that people still rank Georgia number 1, even though you look at that and mathematically or statistically, I suppose if there's a greater chance if you lose in a game if you play 3 top 10 teams than if you only play 1, especially when you consider that I believe all 3 of those games are on the road: Texas, Alabama, and Ole Miss. I mean, 3 road games. I mean, that's an awesome challenge. But to put it into perspective, think about this, and you can double check me on this. Vince Dooley never had a preseason team ranked in the top 5. For all the greatness of Coach Dooley, when you look at the AP top 25 polls preseason, Georgia was never a top 5 fixture, which is really amazing. And when you consider this is the 7th straight year that Georgia's been in the top 5, Georgia's finished in the top 10 7 straight seasons as well, which is also remarkable staying power and really underscores just how much Kirby Smart has accomplished. You go back and look at the Vince Dooley teams, believe it or not, and again, someone can check me on this, but I don't believe that the Herschel Walker teams ever beat a team that was ranked in the top 5 when they played them. Notre Dame was number 7 in that Sugar Bowl. So, and then you look at what Kirby did in just a 29-game win streak. I believe they had 7 wins over top 5 teams in that 29. So I guess what I'm saying is Kirby's put Georgia in a place it's never been. Number 1 looks like business as usual. I know Jalen Walker said a notification came up on his phone. It was just another notification. It doesn't matter. It's not going to affect how Tuesday practice went. It's not going to affect the focus of Saturday's practice. It's not going to affect the score in the Clemson game. Georgia's learned to live with this. It takes time. That's the marking of a championship program that knows how to handle success, handle pressure, I guess. I guess Kirby's saying about assume nothing tells his players, look, may say you're number 1, but until you go out there and do it, you're not. Whether or not Georgia's getting too much credit, not enough credit, remains to be seen. We don't know about this team yet. We don't know how this team will handle adversity. We don't know about where Carson is at from a leadership standpoint when things get hot. Things got hot a few times last year. Sometimes he handled them better than others. We don't know about the defensive personality. We don't know about the defensive line in terms of, how strong they're going to be. Last year, they dropped to 18th in the nation against the run, and very unfortunate preseason injury to Jordan Hall. We'll see. We'll see how Stackhouse and Brinson have worked, and we'll find out about Carson Beck under pressure, and we'll find out about these new playmakers and these young guys in the secondary where you're replacing 3 guys that were drafted in the top 100. So it's a good starting point. It's an honor. It's a compliment. But to Kirby's point, assume nothing.
So at the beginning of the calendar year, I was saying that I thought the Georgia schedule was so tough that it was almost overwhelmingly likely that Georgia would at least lose 1 game somewhere. In fact, I took the next step of saying, I'm not sure we'll see an undefeated college football national champion again for the foreseeable future because, for the most part, all of the top teams are playing tougher schedules than before, and everyone's playing a longer playoff now they have in the past. I would say in the months since then, I probably softened my stance somewhat because Georgia is still a point spread favorite in every game. And in case of like Alabama and Ole Miss, they're at least comfortable enough of a favorite that, Texas is the only game where they're a truly narrow favorite. Every other game, they're at least a field goal favorite. And every other game other than Alabama, they're at least a touchdown favorite. So they're fairly comfortable favorites in all of these games, despite the fact that it's still a really, really tough schedule. So the point I'm getting to, Mike, is I've kind of, I guess, changed my tune a little bit as the year has gone on. Do you think this schedule is too tough to go undefeated? Because David Pollack certainly seems to think that.
I mean, the odds would suggest you would lose one of those games, and just to make sure I capture what you're saying, you've changed your preseason take, because you and I know, BA, that after week 1, we're going to have a lot of different opinions, and after week 2, we'll have even more.
Yeah.
But yeah, going into the season, you look at it and you go, okay, this is manageable because of the point spreads, because we think Georgia's so good. But if Carson Beck has his elbow taped and that deep throw is out of the playbook by week 3, we're going to think a little differently about the Alabama game. Or if I'm not going to speak any injuries into existence, but we both know that there's key players that Georgia can't afford to lose. And you lose one or two of those guys, and I mean, all you got to do is look back at 2019 and poor Jake Fromm. Every week there was a different cast of receivers, and it was the best version of Jake Fromm we'd ever seen on an individual basis. But because that receiving core, what did Kirby say? It was like a merry-go-round of receivers in there. Every week it was somebody different. There was no rhythm. The game plan was at times disjointed. DeAndre Swift fell injured at the most inopportune time of the year. George Pickens struggled to learn the offense under Cortez Hankton the first half of the season. It wasn't really a big factor. Lawrence Cager rose up a couple big games against Notre Dame and Florida, and thank goodness for Georgia that he did, because there really wasn't much of a supporting cast. Now, this supporting cast here, do we put Dylan Bell in the same category with A.D. Mitchell and Ladd McConkey? I'm not ready to do that yet. Certainly, we wouldn't put anyone in Brock Bowers' category at tight end, as optimistic as we are that Oscar Delp and Benjamin, Urasek or Urasek, however we're pronouncing it.
I believe we're going with Urasek now.
Urasek. Okay. Yeah. We don't know. We know they're going to be good, and maybe in a Charlie Warner, Isaac Nauta kind of way. We don't know the status of Trevor Etienne for the first game of the season. We don't know how Nate Frazier will handle a spotlight carry, should he get one. He certainly looks dynamic in practice. We don't really know how far along Branson Robinson is. That has not looked prolific yet. We'll find out more about Roderick Robinson, but as we understand it, he's nursing a little bit of an injury right now. So, on paper, I'm with you. I look at it right now and say, yeah, Georgia can go 13-0, and I've said that. But as the season progresses, after week 1, after week 2, after week 3, and we look at the personnel and we look at other teams, I think it's okay for both of us to kind of reserve the right to change our opinions after week 1, right?
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Shifting gears to fall camp here just for a moment. I talked about this off the top of the show. To me, the most fun rumor mill stuff thus far has been what you've been hearing about the Georgia running backs, whether it be, what Nate Frazier apparently showed during the scrimmage on Saturday, or the fact that Branson Robinson seems pretty far ahead of the pace that I assumed he would be on for an injury recovery. And, of course, maybe in the case of Etienne and Roderick Robinson, just sort of picking up where they left off during spring practice. It seems like Georgia could be in pretty good shape with its running back room and, a new level of sort of spark and explosiveness from guys like Nate Frazier, perhaps. I think that's been maybe the most fun thing to kind of come out of the fall camp rumor mill thus far. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I had a lot of anticipation for Trevor Etienne and Nate Frazier as well when I saw the times in the 100. And, he comes from that Trinity League in Southern California. It's arguably the best high school football in the country when you look at the number of Division I players they produce and the level of ball they play and how they've fared against other schools in some of those national contests. So, you're getting a legit 5-star running back. I mean, this is as good as they coming out of high school, who brings another dynamic. Look forward to that. But to me, Brandon, it's going to come back to Carson Beck and how does Carson do? And certainly there's a lot of pressure and expectation on Carson. But from what we've heard, he's handled the mental part of that game well. Emotionally, what type of leader is he? Well, Kirby Smart said, listen, he's just not an assertive guy. That's just not who he is. He's assertive with his checks and his calls and adjustments, and that's the most important thing. But if not Carson, then who will provide that emotional lift? Can Tate Ratledge do it from the offensive guard position? Is Dominic Lovett a guy that's vocal? Arian Smith, Dylan Bell, Oscar Delp? At the end of the day, it comes down to what's in the huddle and how those players respond to one another. And that's the great unknown. Now, we know that Kirby's great at team building, and we know that past Georgia teams have rallied around one another like few other teams in the nation. But it's up to this team to establish their own identity. And, when you play Clemson in a neutral site and you play at Kentucky and you play at Alabama, 3 of your first 4 games, you're going to find out pretty fast and you're going to come together pretty quickly. Otherwise, you break apart. And I'd bet on the Dogs coming together. It's just a matter of keeping the right guys healthy.
What else are you hearing about fall camp right now?
Well, I've heard that Carson's scrimmage wasn't exactly his best. I heard he looked adequate, but didn't look great. I heard Kirby Smart say that he wants Carson to get better acquainted relationships with some of the backup receivers. I mean, Carson's good with the returning guys, but there's a lot of impact guys coming in, albeit freshmen or maybe young sophomores along with transfers that, he wants Carson to get on the same page with, because you go back to what you said, what Kirby told the boosters. It doesn't sound like college football to say this, but you just got to get in the playoff. And if Georgia has one loss or two losses in their playoff, it really doesn't matter. If it'd be great, ideally you win the SEC and you get a bye, but realistically, the odds are probably against that Georgia goes undefeated. I think I read somewhere there was a 33% chance they'd win the SEC championship, which is still pretty good when you consider the other 15 teams. But you go in as a team, maybe you play a road game. Remember, the 5-12 game is a home road situation, or maybe we see a playoff game in Sanford Stadium. Insert joke about moving the game to Jacksonville here, by the way, which won't happen. But point is, as long as you get in the playoffs, that's all that really matters. That's the new model, and that's going to be a hard shift in mentality for old guys like me that are used to every game being a playoff. Well, it is and it isn't now. And Kirby's got to build this team in a way that they're strong and deep enough to sustain that potential 16, 17 game season.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see too, and we'll kind of finish up with this. I think there's a lot of excitement about the idea of hosting the home playoff game, so much so that the next iteration of the playoff, I think, is going to probably feature more chances for teams to host playoff games as opposed to the large collection of neutral site games we currently see in this current model. But putting aside the excitement about hosting a game, like how much does it hurt you or not to have to play the extra round? My assumption is if you're one of those 5, 6 seed, something like that, and you're playing like the 11, the 12 seed, you're a big enough favorite in that game playing in your own stadium. I can't imagine your national championship odds are damaged too much by that. In other words, I don't know how much of an advantage. We'll all see this play out in real life in front of our own eyes coming up in a few months. I don't know how much of an actual advantage being one of the top 4 seeds, skipping ahead to the quarterfinal round is necessarily going to be, knowing that for most of these teams that are hosting the playoff games, you're going to be playing a team that on paper you're 2 touchdowns better than anyway. I'm just not quite so sure that there's a huge penalty if you're not one of the top 4 seeds. We may find out that that's absolutely the case, and you definitely want to be one of those top 4 seeds. My guess is we'll see plenty of teams playing in the first round of the playoff who then go on to also win quarterfinal games as well.
Wow, that's a bold take, BA. I don't know either. I mean, it remains to be seen, what the difference is between the teams that get buys and the teams that are, having to play in that first round. I guess I would point to 2017. And even though there wasn't a 12-team playoff, Alabama didn't have to play that extra game in the SEC championship game that Georgia did. And you wonder if that put a little bit more mileage on the Dogs, a little bit more on their legs. Maybe they're just a little bit fresher. And 26-23 overtime loss, which was pencil or razor thin margin. Maybe Georgia wins that game if they didn't have to play that extra game against Auburn. Or you could take the other argument that, Georgia getting shipped out to the West Coast and losing a day of preparation and the injury to Charlie Warner. Oklahoma was a substantially more difficult opponent than Clemson was for Alabama in their early playoff game. So I don't have much more to draw on than that in terms of a case where a team benefited from not playing an extra game. I guess we'll always debate whether or not Alabama should have made the college football playoff without playing in their league championship game, but they won the title, and that's all anybody's going to remember. I think it has more to do with the healthier team and whether that extra game, leads to you sustaining an injury that you might not otherwise have had. That would be the disadvantage. I don't think there is an advantage to playing an extra game. To me, it can only be disadvantageous. I don't know what you think about that take, but I don't think there's anything bad about getting a bye. So I still think that that's a favorable position. It's something to play for. And then the double whammy, Brandon, what happens to the team that loses the SEC championship game? When you look at the teams in the SEC and how highly they're ranked, is it possible that a 2-loss SEC team could lose in the SEC championship game and not make the playoff while 2 other teams do that did not play in the game, that don't have that extra loss because they didn't have to play in the league championship game. So there's a lot of questions to answer.
I think that's a really good question, and I've noodled this around. I just don't see. Obviously, we're going to see this play out in real life, right? And because that's the real drama. If you made the championship game and then got knocked out of the playoff, but mathematically, I just don't see how we get there, right? I mean, if you're good enough to be one of the top 2 teams in the SEC, I just don't see how you get knocked out of the playoff because you played in the SEC championship. Because honestly, a 9-3 team from the SEC would make the college football playoff. So if you had only 2 losses going to the title game, you suffered the 3rd loss there, you're still going to be one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the SEC, even after that loss. I know that's the sort of like apocalyptic scenario of, gosh, the SEC championship game cost somebody a playoff bid, but mathematically, I just don't think we get there.
Well, here's the scenario that comes to mind, and I'm pulling this out of the sky. Let's say you have a 2-loss Missouri that has the tiebreaker on a 2-loss Ole Miss and a 2-loss Alabama, and Georgia's playing Missouri in the SEC championship game and beats them by 31 points. Suddenly, Missouri with 3 losses and not much of a reputation for national success doesn't look maybe as attractive as that 2-loss Michigan team that's sitting on the bubble, or that 2-loss TCU team that won their last 6 games of the season. So I'm with you. I'm making a very extreme example, and you're probably 95% right in terms of the unlikelihood of a team falling out. There are scenarios, and there is some misfortune, or even if you get a better seed, maybe those teams move up in the seeding, and now a team that played in the SEC title game, which by all rights would suggest it was one of the top 2 teams during the regular season, now they lose that placement, and now they're not only not hosting, they're going on the road because they've fallen behind the 2 other 2-loss teams, and suddenly they have a different draw. You mentioned the 5-12 games could have extreme point spreads. Well, the 8-9 game may not.
That's right.
So I guess that's the scenario, but we don't know. We really don't know how the committee is going to rank these league championships. Maybe they'll take the approach that we see with college basketball. They pretty much ignore the SEC postseason basketball tournament. And maybe that's what'll happen here. So there's a lot of unanswered questions. I'm sure there'll be a lot of unintended consequences. And I think, Georgia fans are sitting back saying, hey, look, as long as the Dogs are in, we really don't care. Just tell us the Dogs are going to be in. They should be in. But that schedule is really wicked. And it's going to be really important that this team shows they can handle adversity. And I think we're going to learn a lot about Georgia in the month of September for sure.
Mike, as we wrap up here, a lot of great feedback about your tell-all interview with Kaylee Manziel that has popped up in the DawgNation video channels. People can go watch that right now. DawgNation on YouTube, getting a chance to hear your backstory of, obviously your service in our U.S. military and, of course, your time kind of pre-dating your arrival at DawgNation, kind of an interaction you had with Mark Richt that people need to see for themselves. All of this on the DawgNation video channels. Mike, I certainly hope people will check that out because it was obviously very good stuff.
Yeah, one of the many great productions that we have at DawgNation, and hopefully they'll watch it to the end, because I said my favorite part of that interview was having the opportunity to brag on our company and the kind of shows that we're able to do. And think about how much we've grown out of your product, Brandon. I mean, you've been our staple every day at 10 a.m. with DawgNation Daily. And, because of the success that you've had, we've been able to grow into other areas of new media that you just don't see other companies doing. But obviously it doesn't happen without this program. It doesn't happen without these people that view and comment on your show every single day that are a part of that. So, to me, this is community success, right? I mean, I go back and I say Georgia never beats Notre Dame in 2019 without the crowd. And I think you'd agree with me that, without the people that support our programming and that watch DawgNation Daily every day, that's really been a key for us doing a lot of the neat stuff that we're doing right now with Cody Chaffins and Kaylee Manziel and Connor Riley. So I'm just really proud and appreciative to be a part of this team.
All right, Mike, great stuff. Thanks for your time here today. We'll look forward to talking to you soon and plenty more of your coverage from UGA Fall Camp as the 2024 season approaches.
All right. Thanks, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, so to back up what I was talking about with Mike, I did some very, very quick research. And so, according to what Google is telling me here, There have been 7 NFL wildcard teams that have gone on to win the Super Bowl since the system was introduced in 1970. So the point here is that in the NFL, while there's obviously an advantage to being one of the division winners, we used to have 2 byes, 2 teams got byes to the divisional round, and I think now it's just the one, that while there's an advantage to that, it is not an overwhelming advantage. 7 times the wild card team, and by the way, in some cases, think about Eli Manning, the New York Giants. In some cases, that's wild card teams going on the road too, by the way. But teams have gone through the wild card round, the divisional round, to the conference championship, gone on to win the Super Bowl. That's happened 7 times. Also, if you look at, and this goes back to 2019, so this is a few years ago, these numbers might have changed, obviously probably have changed somewhat since then, but as of 2019, teams that got a bye in the wild card round and played their first playoff game in the divisional round, they obviously had a winning record in those games, but not necessarily overwhelming. As of 2019, those teams that had a bye to the divisional round were 43-21 in their playoff games. That is a 67.2 winning percentage. So about a third of the teams that had the bye playing as the sort of bye team on divisional playoff weekend went on to lose. My theory would be, now we'll see this play out, but my theory will be that we'll see even more of that in college football, because in the NFL, there's a little bit more of a sameness, kind of sort of a sameness to the teams where like they're all relatively equal. College football teams, even at the college football playoff level, are not all equal. And the 4 bye teams, the teams that get the bye to the quarterfinal, those are all conference champions. I believe we'll see more at-large teams win national championships than we'll see teams that got a bye and won conference championships win national championships, because the better leagues are just going to have the better teams, and obviously very frequently that's going to be a team in the SEC that maybe didn't win the conference championship but goes on to win the national championship. We've already seen that a couple of times. So my theory is that not being one of the top 4 seeds is actually not going to prove to be all that harmful to your chances of winning a national championship. We'll see over the course of years how true that turns out to be, but that is my theory right now. Now, my theory that has been well confirmed many, many times is that you'll have a great time if you're on board Utopia of the Seas or one of these fabulous Royal Caribbean cruise ships sometime here in late 2024, going into 2025. And Jessica Slater is the travel agent you need to choose to help get all that done. Now, Jessica is specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean because she and I were together on Utopia of the Seas going back a few weeks ago. She knows all the Royal Caribbean offerings, and she knows how to help you make your right choice in all this. Because here's why Royal Caribbean encourages you to use a great travel agent to make a wonderful Royal Caribbean cruise vacation even better. Even for someone like me, who's pretty, obviously acquainted with the product, there's still an unbelievable array of choices. What category of stateroom do you want? What port do you want to sail out of? What ship do you want to sail on? Which, itinerary do you want to visit? You want to make sure you're at port, at a Perfect Day Coco Cay? Would you be okay going somewhere else? There's obviously other great destinations that Royal Caribbean sails to there as well. Just one of the many collection of options you have to choose from, and a travel agent helps you categorize and kind of catalog all of those various choices. That's what a great travel agent is going to be able to do for you. So Jessica can tell you all about Utopia of the Seas. She can tell you all about our DawgNation cruise coming up in April. So please give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. All right, let's bounce through a couple of topics here just for a moment. Do you remember the 5-star quarterback Julian JuJu Lewis? We obviously talked about him a lot over the course of the year. We started talking about him much less when Georgia made its decision to kind of focus on Ryan Montgomery, obviously adding him to the class, and Lewis was sort of wished well as he moved on to the next phase of his life. He's still obviously a very good quarterback, but his recruitment has taken, I would say, a pretty interesting twist, where as of now, Lewis, who technically is still a USC commit, but it has always seemed likely that he might end up somewhere else because he has certainly given a lot of time to schools other than USC. But in the aftermath of Georgia kind of exiting the sweepstakes for Lewis, it wasn't obvious where the next spot for JuJu was going to end up being. Well, based on some reporting that's out there now, including, Steve Wiltfong from On3, based on some reporting that's out there now, the most likely non-USC suitor for Julian JuJu Lewis is Indiana. Now, what is going on here? On the one hand, you have seen some rather unusual suspects emerge as contenders for top quarterbacks. For instance, A.J. Hill, terrific quarterback from Houston County. Hill has recently committed to Memphis, and the thought here is he's getting a lot of NIL for doing that. You got FedEx money there in Memphis. I believe that Hill's also signed a trading card deal. So, in some cases, we've seen group of 5 level teams do okay with quarterback recruiting, either retaining their quarterbacks or signing a quarterback. We've seen them do okay with that. Maybe this is an example of Indiana, which is not a group of 5 team, but also not a, very prestigious power conference team either. Maybe this is an example of they've got some NIL to spend. They're putting it all in the direction of quarterback here. But even if we were to stipulate that's true, doesn't this still seem a little bit strange that the major power conference school is just not emerging as a contender for Lewis alongside USC? We heard about Deion Sanders in Colorado, but the truth is anybody who takes themselves serious as a player can't even consider Colorado right now. It's such a mess. And obviously Lewis is smart enough to sort of see right through that too. At one point in time, we thought it might be Auburn. Auburn clearly is spending big, seemingly on the NIL front for recruits, but for whatever reason, the connection with Lewis is not being made right now. This is a pretty strange recruitment, and I think it continues to be strange, and so we'll see if Indiana really does emerge as a real threat for Julian JuJu Lewis, or perhaps this is all just a smokescreen. Speaking of SEC rivals to the Georgia Bulldogs, one of the teams they'll play on the field this fall, kind of a newly minted rival, that is Texas. And we talked to you yesterday about a pretty serious Texas running back injury. Well, another injury to report today for a Texas running back as well. This time it's Christian Clark, who former 4-star incoming freshman here, a guy after the C.J. Baxter injury was supposed to kind of step up and help fill the void, and now he's hurt too. So Texas all of a sudden finds its running back situation pretty depleted, so much so that much like Georgia played Dylan Bell at running back some last year, I think Texas is also considering playing a wide receiver at running back some this year as well. This is a team that's just all of a sudden found a pretty big hole at the running back spot after a couple of fall camp injuries. Once again, all the more reason why, if you think about the game against Georgia and you think about Texas trying to get creative, maybe we do see kind of a package for Arch Manning and a package for Quinn Ewers. Obviously, Manning probably the more capable running quarterback between those two. So for Steve Sarkisian, what's supposed to be a big first year for his program in the SEC, all of a sudden now they're going to be asked to do that without a couple of healthy running backs. They suffered 2 injuries there at that spot in recent days. We told you yesterday about Hugh Freeze kind of saying some weird stuff. He does have 2 career wins against Nick Saban. That's a pretty significant professional accomplishment. But Freeze chose to use that as a way of kind of exaggerating the point even more, saying, I beat him twice, should have beat him 4 times. Well, he sort of said that it's an example of Freeze, who I think is a good coach and certainly knows the talent acquisition game. Perhaps not always the smoothest speaker, and perhaps says some things that sometimes create some unnecessary drama for himself. This is an example of that. He goes in the Feinbaum show, is forced to sort of clarify his original statement on this of what he actually meant was blah, blah, blah. In politics, the rule is if you're explaining, you're dying. You're certainly not winning. And the fact that Freeze is having to explain and clarify some previous remarks is just an example of, for a coach who's pretty accomplished on the field and seemingly pretty tireless as a recruiter, not always the savviest guy with the media. And in the SEC, probably pretty important to make sure you've got that part of the game figured out. Hugh Freeze apparently still has some things he's learning on that front. I'll also mention of this, speaking of people not always saying the right thing. So Jim Harbaugh was supposed to come back for Michigan's first game as kind of an honorary captain, whatever. I guess cooler heads have prevailed now. Now that's not going to happen. Harbaugh's not going to be there. Once again, the frustration about all this continues of sanctimonious behavior from Michigan. Obviously, they knew what they did. They knew they cheated. They knew they benefited from the cheating. They also knew no one was going to do anything about it. So whether Harbaugh goes back to a game at Michigan or not, it doesn't change the fact that Michigan used its power to protect itself, and the NCAA is essentially a paper tiger in terms of being able to do anything against anyone. They only have authority over programs that choose to give them that authority. It frustrates me that Georgia, multiple times in the 21st century, allowed the NCAA to assert control over them when no one else seemed all that willing to do so. So this is a frustrating situation. But Harbaugh was supposed to go back to Michigan, and I guess there's at least some degree of shame in place there that's going to prevent him from doing that. So we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. All right, a couple of shouts out here before we get ready to say goodbye to you today. First of all, our friends at Dr. Pepper. And by the way, what a great lunch I had with my buddy Jonathan from Dr. Pepper the other day. And I got some great new Dr. Pepper swag. I'll sort of bring this in and show it to you at some point in time. But we were having such a good time. Dr. Pepper going to be a big part of some of the big events we have coming up for Dog Nation here this year, including some of our Dog Nation invasions. Can't wait to tell you more about that. And obviously in these final days of summer before we get to the start of the 2024 season, of course, Dr. Pepper's got you covered with the Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut and the Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar. It's amazing how popular this beverage has been because of the connection, the obvious connection it has to summer. So as you're out there at your local Kroger or wherever you're doing your grocery shopping, pick yourself up some Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar, I should say Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar, or Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut. Enjoy all of that today. Also, tonight, this afternoon and into tonight, we have our first high school football games of the year. That's why I'm wearing my Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic shirt here today on the Peachtree Sports Network. We'll kick things off 4:30 p.m. with LaGrange, one of the winningest programs in state history, taking on Douglas out of Atlanta, and, of course, John Tay Gilbert. The UGA commit on display for you on the Peachtree Sports Network. We think it's the first game nationally all year long, at least in the continental United States. So we'll have that for you here today. And don't forget, speaking of Gilbert, more on that this evening as well when it comes to Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, our terrific recruiting show hosted by Jeff Sintel. He'll have more on Gilbert here today. Also, another guy we'll have on TV for you tonight, Chase Linton, the edge rusher out of North Atlanta. Jeff taking a closer look at him today there as well. And a lot of action for Georgia right now in the class of 2026 when it comes to the wide receiver position. We'll have more for that for you tonight here on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. So we'll see you there for that, and I'll see you tonight on Peachtree Sports Network as well. All right, golden shoe to wrap things up here today. Speaking of enjoying summer, that is the theme of our golden shoe here today. Our buddy Brian Weiler reaching out to us there on that, saying, I found the pineapple long drink in St. Louis. Enjoying the amazing weather this weekend. It's one of the cool things about getting up there a little farther in the north. You get some nice, pleasant summer evenings, a beautiful sunset there for Brian as he enjoys the pineapple flavor of the Finnish long drink with the gorgeous sky in the background. How good does that look? I always say the Finnish long drink just sort of tastes better outdoors to me. Anytime you get a chance to enjoy that on the back deck or a beautiful sky as a backdrop or a tailgate, the Finnish long drink always going great with all of that. By the way, continue to use the hashtag sip and swing, and you can be in to win. Register for your chance for a golf outing with us and the Finnish long drink coming up in the month of September. But we'll give Brian a golden shoe for all of that. Lousy stinking Gators. Gatorator updater, how about 1,376 days? That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. That is our Gatorator updater. We'll see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. All right, we're going to be quick with our comments today, but we will take some. I'm also going to plug in here to make sure my battery doesn't die, and then we're going to roll through, and I'm going to get untangled from all these wires. Oh, goodness. There we go. Now I'm untangled. Now we're ready to go. A lot of fun coming here with our R.S. Andrews Cool Down here right now. A lot of moving parts over here right now. So hope you're doing well. Good stuff from Mike Griffith. And I think the conversation that Mike and I were having a moment ago is a little bit of an example of, if you go back, and I've talked about this before, but if you go back and look at some of the stuff that was being said about the playoff in 2014, a lot of that just proved to be so wrong because we hadn't seen it before. And the one thing that the powerful people in college football do, like a lot of powerful people in life, they say one thing and do something else. They just do. That's just how it goes. They say, oh, we value this, but ultimately they make different decisions. And so in 2014, if you remember those first playoff rankings, you know, Mississippi State was the first ever #1 team in the CFP top 25. But you also had, I believe, Auburn and Ole Miss in the top 4 there as well. There was all this debate and discussion of, can we really have 3 SEC teams in the college football playoff? Now, we would eventually have 2 SEC teams in the playoff. But the answer was no, we're never going to have 3 teams from the SEC in the college football playoff. They just never going to do that. What we learned over the period of years is that the CFP rankings were a completely different animal from the actual top 25 that determined who made the playoff. We learned that over time, and our conversation was shaped by our lived experience as the playoff was a part of our life for all those years. The same thing is going to happen this year. It's almost unavoidable. Where week to week, we're going to probably get somewhat hysterical, not just we on this show, but like the collective we. We'll get somewhat hysterical about some sort of thing with the 12-team playoff, only to determine by the time you get there, they've sort of got their own idea of what they want to do, and they'll become just a more accepted pattern of this is how it's all going to work out. But we don't know that yet because we haven't seen it. So this will be a very weird year for playoff discussion in terms of how valuable is it to be a top 4 seed and what would knock you out of the playoffs. All of that going to be kind of determined by what we see sort of playing out in the next few weeks. Spencer Clark says, I miss fishing with my dad at West Point Lake. He calls it crappie heaven up there, or crappie, I guess you say. RIP to Dad there on that. Yeah, I don't know if you've listened to like Luke Combs' latest album where he has a lot of songs. It's really a song. I guess the album is Fathers and Sons, but it's a lot of songs about that kind of stuff. So, I'm a sentimental person just in general about my own dad's passing and my relationship I have with my 2 kids right now. And that Luke Combs album, if you haven't listened to it, it'll get you. It'll get you. Jonathan Aaron says, all the different studios and all that Jimbo money, but still not a cough button for when you sneeze. So I actually do have a button. It's right here. So if I release it, you can hear me again. But the problem is if I'm turned this way, I don't quite have the dexterity to turn and I just don't quite have. Especially when I'm sneezing. Like when the sneeze is coming, you know it's coming. I don't quite have the smoothness just sort of to go find that button. I don't quite have that.
Yeah, producer Jay chiming in here. We do have a cough button.
Yeah.
We did make that improvement. It's just you have to know how to execute it sometimes.
See, y'all gonna get me in trouble. See, I knew I was gonna get in trouble for sneezing on Cameron. See, y'all have given him the ammunition he needs to come after me. Thanks a lot, Jonathan. I appreciate that. For sure. All right, let's see what else. Alan Hampton says a good friend and former All-American at Georgia that watched some practice says Branson Robinson looks like he was never injured, but I hear different from other podcasts. I mean, I still think I think it's still appropriate to be cautious with a guy like that coming back from injury. In other words, I don't think Georgia's going to give anybody 25 carries, but do I think you could give Branson Robinson theoretically 25 carries against Clemson? I probably don't. Is he healthier right now than I probably thought he would be? Almost certainly yes. Almost certainly yes. So that to me is the kind of full range of the answers here. Robinson probably still deserves some caution just because he doesn't look like he's hurting. There is a certain element of that that's probably still invisible. But is he healthier than I anticipated that he would be? Seems like he probably is. A lot of folks representing LaGrange near. Yeah, when you go and kind of dive into this and look at the program, LaGrange, one of the winningest programs in state history. Early 2000s, they had a stretch where they won 3 straight state championships, like a 4-year span or something like that. I think they won a total of 5 state championships altogether, second winningest program ever in Georgia. But obviously, prior to Coach Napier arriving, they'd kind of fallen on some hard times a little bit, had a string of coaches. And so one of the things you've seen from Coach Napier is kind of a return to a little bit more of what the LaGrange fans have come to expect. Winning 8-9 games with regularity, perhaps even seeing a team that could take that next step as they kind of drop down to 3A right now. So, yeah. Stick D says, do you think this year's team is better than 2021? I would say that right now, that'd be a pretty hard case to make. Now, could they prove to be in that category over the course of the season? They'll have their chance to do that. That would be, to me, a pretty hard case to make right now, though. Let us see what else. Yeah, Spencer Clark also mentioned the fact that LaGrange was a powerhouse back in the day. And that's one of my favorite things about, my relationship with high school football. All the programs that are so deeply tied to their communities. And that, those folks over in LaGrange, they love their Granger's football team. They love it. They love it. And we're going to have Callaway on Friday, another example of that. Callaway folks love their program. And obviously we could go on and on and on and on. Especially, and just to be completely honest, the farther you get out of like the metro Atlanta area where like there's a million teams in Cobb, a million teams in Gwinnett, there's a million teams in all these, counties around Atlanta. As you get out of town a little bit, the school is the thing in the community in a way that sometimes the in-town schools have a hard time matching. I really like that. I really, really enjoy that. I just love the connection some of these schools have to their communities, and I love putting that on display on high school football, and hopefully we do a good job of that. Let us see what else. On Facebook here for a moment. We'll find out what's on the mind of the folks over there. Some folks asking about a little preseason get-together. So I know we've got the big event coming up for the first week. I don't know about a season kickoff event here right now. I don't know that we have anything planned on that here at the moment. Richard Sheffield says, think we will see NIL officially make its way to high school ball. It has with basketball and unofficially is already done. So if you're Julian Lewis or one of these major, kind of prospects, you can get NIL payments in Georgia now. What you can't do is start a collective, let's say that you were a LaGrange fan. You can't start a collective and kind of do the pay for play like college football sort of become, where the NIL payments are sort of a de facto form of just a salary, basically. You're paying the players to play. You can't do that, but NIL is legal for Georgia athletes right now. John Paul Williams asking for broadcasting on Rumble. No, but I have thought about that. I think we probably could, yeah, we're not, but I think we probably could. I know Barstool does stuff on Rumble. So I think we could probably add that to our repertoire, I believe. It used to be that every time we had a new platform, we had to add another laptop, and we had this chain of laptops that were trying to keep the show on the air. It's one of the reasons why we crashed so much last year. I think now it's a little bit easier to add whatever platform you want to. Obviously, the most people watch, I think, on YouTube. DawgNation.com, I believe, is a pretty close second. And Facebook's sort of all over the place. Some days a lot of people watch. Some days not that many people watch. It's just sort of random, whatever kind of mood Facebook is in. So the other platforms, like we're on Twitch, but that's a pretty small audience. X is a fairly small audience for the most part. Although I do think the X functionality is pretty good. I think that X as a video player is actually pretty good. If you ever watch other video in X, I think it's a pretty good user experience for the most part. Whereas I would say that Facebook, for the most part, a lot of people spend a lot of time on Facebook. So therefore a video player on Facebook is going to do pretty well. But I don't think Facebook's video player is very good. Whereas I think the X video player, despite the fact that for us, we've just never had as large an audience on X, I think the actual player is pretty good. Let's see what else. Sam Burke says, I found it interesting that Kirby called the lack of depth in football the deterioration of football. He says, I've recently started to wonder how long this game will last. So a few things on that. First of all, I do take what Kirby said about the deterioration of football pretty seriously, but I'll also acknowledge it sounds a little bit like what NFL people have been saying for a long time. NFL coaches are always going to college coaches. Oh, we can't find offensive linemen. We can't find quarterbacks. They've been saying that for decades. There's always a little bit of a sound the alarm about not finding the players that we need. They're not being developed anymore. NFL guys have been saying that for a long time. Kirby saying that now about his own roster or just college football in general is a fairly common topic for football that's existed for a long time. But your overall point about football, look, I do think that football's got to be defended. I do. And we try to do some of that around here, but honestly, some of that kind of gets outside our charter. that we're a Georgia football show, and we talk about Georgia football, and it's a little bit outside the boundaries of our charter to be talking about the war on football, but there 100% is a war on football, 100%, and it's being fought on 1,000 different fronts for 1,000 different reasons, but there is a war on football, and it's not obvious that football is winning the war on football. And when you look at the NFL, for instance, everything you think is weird about the NFL, in one way or another, is an example of some ground that was lost in the ongoing war on football. And the NFL, because it's very corporate-minded, is just sort of willing to give ground on certain things and say, this isn't the hill to die on, this isn't the hill to die on. But eventually, when you surrender a whole bunch of hills, you're kind of left with a sort of a smaller, smaller footprint than you started with. So, this is one of those things I probably can't say as much about as I'd maybe perhaps like to. But there is a war on football. Football needs to be defended. Somebody probably should. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do that. Jacob O'Neill says Warner Robins got a tough game right out of the gate this Friday. If you look at those regions down there in Central Georgia, man, there are some crazy tough regions down there. Crazy tough regions. I love football in Central Georgia. I love Warner Robins, love Houston County. I know those folks don't love each other, but I love that. Obviously, Perry State champion, Jones. I love Central Georgia. Love Central Georgia for football. Let's see what else. Jacob O'Neill says, what time is the first game today? So we're 4:30 out of the blocks today. Now, Friday, there's also 2 more games tomorrow, which I'm not doing. But on Friday, we were supposed to have 2 games there, and that got changed because many of you heard about the horrible bus wreck that the Rome Wolves were involved with after their scrimmage. Terribly. Seems like right now everybody's okay, but potentially a horrific situation. So they're not going to be able to play on Friday because of that. So we'll have just the one game at 7:30 on Friday, but 2 games today, 4:30, and then at the conclusion of that. So Chase Linton will be in our night game tonight against a very good Kell team. Caleb Myers says, when our Glen Academy team make the playoffs, we'd always run to the buzzsaw every year that was Northside Warner Robins. Indeed, that is the case. It seems like a lot of that happens for sure. All right, let's go to DawgNation.com. We're going to wrap things up for today. Dave Snow said, Warner Robins High School. Go Demons for Dave Snow. How about that? Dave, our buddy Bob Tharp from Meriwether and Tharp, he's also a Warner Robins grad, too. I wonder if y'all know each other. DT says that Parkview never seems to be in Corky Kell. Parkview was in Corky Kell a good number of years, a few years ago, because I did a couple of Parkview games back when Eric Godfrey was still there. Parkview's been in Corky Kell plenty. DT says the bus for Rome rolled over 4 times. I mean, can you imagine that? How scary that would be? Oh my gosh, so scary. B Mac mentioning Buford. Yeah, Buford not in Corky Kell this year, but they do have that big game on Friday night. Buford and Milton. Admittedly, that's a very fun game, very big game. Kayla Myers, yes, Rusty is Kaylee's dad. That is indeed the case. And so I'll see both the Manzels later on this afternoon. Let's see what else. All right, we're going to get ready to wrap things up for today. Appreciate that. Foster Moss says it can get real hectic in the Bear Den at Burke County. I love that, man. I love that. Lance D also pointing out that Buford's about to open a brand new stadium. That's going to be amazing. Ann Phillips says Valdosta had the toughest team. His biggest guys, they would beat you up. Gave LaGrange trouble every year. And obviously, now we don't have the 7A classification anymore. Pretty much everybody that was in 7A kind of moves down and becomes Region 1 and 6A, and that's still the toughest region there probably is anywhere. You got to imagine that's the case. All right, really good stuff. We are going to wrap things up today. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the prices promised. You can trust them on all of that. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. RS Andrews cool down. It's all said and done. Between now and then, if you need to get your air conditioning unit tuned up, RS Andrews can help you do that. So find them online, rsandrews.com. You can stay cool and comfortable with the rest of the summer that's still on its way, and obviously into the college football season there as well. By the way, the return of Go With The Flow, presented by RS Andrews, very soon there as well. So all of that's coming. We will talk to you soon. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. We'll see you then, everybody.